What's the scariest place on earth? For me, it's anywhere where no one can hear your scream. They call me Mr. Night Scares, and I've spent more nights than I can count listening to the dark say things people don't say in daylight. Tonight, I've got 5 true stories from the middle of nowhere, places where the map thins out, your phone dies, and every unusual sound gets an invitation to become a threat. 3 of these come from people who lived them. 2 will have to wait for verified sourcing. I'm starting with the one that still makes my palms sweat when I think about nylon tearing under the brush of a hand that shouldn't be there. We were kids, or close enough, school friends who thought 4 hours into scrubland was a good idea. My name didn't matter then, neither did age or common sense. We called it an adventure because none of us wanted to call it a stupid decision. The property belonged to my dad, Wuriyalik, a backcountry slice that wore the sun's dust like an old man wears his cardigan. He worked elsewhere most days, which made it feel ours when we hiked in. It also made it easy to convince ourselves we were alone. The walk-in was a grind of thorn and sweat. The scrub grows close there, every branch a small conspiracy. Light filtered down in green panels. The ground smelled of that dry iron you get when the heat has been sitting on the dirt for weeks. We found a clearing before dusk, a stone ring for a fire, a patch-worn flat where people had lain down before. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Before we even set the tent, I saw the bone. It was small at first, a white flash among the litter. Then I saw the scatter, bleached what looked like fragments, bits of something that should not sit at a campsite. The air cooled. Chris laughed, but it didn't hit right. Matt joked about snakes. I remember the dry sound of his voice, the way it skipped when the joke didn't take. We gathered wood like people trying to act normal in a room that's just been told a secret. Night came on fast. No city glow, just the slow swallowing of shapes. Our headlamps carved shallow pools in the black, while everything else refused to commit to a form. We drank from a thermos, the metal rim warm against our teeth. The hairs at the back of my neck kept reproaching me. I kept ignoring them. At some point after midnight we were asleep inside the tent, the nylon a thin moon between us and whatever else was out there. Then a torch beam swept across the fabric. It was the banal kind of sweep that trips your brain into thinking someone is on a walk. A broad arc, not aimed, as if lighting for navigation. But that light was coming from the ring where we'd made the fire, and the sound that went with it, boots on compacted dirt, arrived like punctuation. First I heard the boots, heavy, deliberate. Then came whispers, not words so much as breathy syllables that curled along the inside of the tent. Someone was circling, slow, as if circling an animal too wary to strike, but too curious to leave alone. The fabric tightened against my arm, where my hand was folded under my head. Matt whispered something I couldn't catch, a single consonant, a prayer that had no verb. Then a palm traced the outside of the tent. Not a dragging or a scratch, just a flat, unexpected hand that pressed and moved as if feeling for the shape inside. The nylon yielded to it the way an eyelid yields to a fingertip. I felt it. The pad of a finger. The pressure, then crawling across the seam until it reached the pole. I froze the way your body freezes on instinct and then becomes a statue to a single, small horror. We sat up, whispering in rushes that didn't make sense. The light moved away. The footsteps retreated. Nothing more happened. No voice called. No shadowy figure revealed itself. Just whatever had been there folding back into the night. We didn't sleep after that. Dawn felt unearned. We packed with hands that trembled and moved fast enough our fingers bled a little on thorns. We ran to the road, to my dad's house, lungs burning in a way anger never made them burn. He opened the door bleary-eyed and incredulous. He'd been at home the whole night, he said. Didn't leave the house, didn't hear anything. We told him about the bones, about the tapping. He listened with a kind of patient disbelief, like a man cataloguing a son's bad dream. But later, from a distance where lanes converged into an old logging track, I found the shack. It was near a dry gully where wind set the grass to whisper. The building had been put together by hands that knew only how to do with what they had. Slabs of timber, a corrugated roof contorted by time. There was a drum outside, a blackened thing like a mouth that had eaten its fill of flames. Inside, scorched fabric hung like lungs from a nail. There were axes propped against the wall, rusted, the handles worn smooth. The air around the place had a smell I have not been able to properly name since. Old smoke and sun-bleached cloth and dust that tasted like absence. No one was there. No tracks that meant a face could be matched to a step. Nothing that could tell us why someone had been at our tent at midnight, why bone fragments lay near our fire. The police came, they took notes, and the answers were thinner than the paper they wrote on. They told us to stick to populated campgrounds, to make noise, to be careful. They said some things with certainty, some without. The bones were described as what they likely were. The scene at the shack was logged. They did not, to my knowledge, find a person to charge. It never became a case with a neat ending. What it left was slower, a constant small recalibration. The idea of nylon as a barrier had been eroded. Tents became fragile speech balloons you could press against and hear the person inside answer. The backyard still felt safer than the bush. I stopped sleeping in tents for a long time. When I do now, I have a hard time believing the dark is merely dark. If that first story hooked you, if it made your teeth edge together and your palms itch, stick around. If you're into late-night true scares, hit subscribe. It helps keep the lights on. We move from dry heat to damp green. The next one happened up in the Adirondacks, where the pine is taller and the rivers run cold enough to make your breath answer you. Mark and Melissa planned that trip for months. They wanted a long weekend alone, something removed from the city's noise. The news cycle, meanwhile, had a different plan. 2 dangerous fugitives had escaped somewhere in the region. It made the local police loud on the radios and quiet on the phones, if that makes sense. Warnings were given, and the world was put on alert. But Mark and Melissa wanted to be off the beaten path. They thought that being far out would mean being safe. They were wrong in the particular, and terrifyingly right in another. They hiked away from the trail, deeper than most weekenders go. The trees knitted their branches, the sun leaked through in thin threads. The air was thick with the smell of pine sap and wet earth. At night, the forest's voices seemed to concentrate, every twig and leaf a small instrument that could suddenly become a drum for someone else's steps. The first anomaly was subtle. A pattern of heat signatures on a drone, Mark later told me, had diverted the manhunt to the wrong quadrant. That, if the official report is to be believed, meant SWAT teams were scouring areas the fugitives had not used. All of this was background until a set of beam sweeps hit their tent. Melissa was the first to see the movement. 2 dark shapes quartering the canopy, low, quick, as if the people carrying them had no intention of being seen. Then a sound like a zipper slit through the night, fabric tearing. The opening of the tent was not gentle. A slash had been made near the mesh of the vestibule, where a hand could reach inside. Mark and Melissa were startled up into a flurry of light and breath. They thought at first they were being robbed by hunters. Mark's hands found the flashlight, and the voice left the body the way a frightened bird leaves a closed hand. Heat and noise flared. Boots, shouts, a command to get down. People crashed into their canvas, and the world inverted into a tight, violent geometry of body and gear. They were pinned under shoulders and rifles, the smell of gun oil in the night, faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. The men and women in tactical gear barked orders, while voices behind them demanded ID. Mark's hands went up. Melissa parroted names, hers, his, like a prayer. For a stuttering moment the 2 of them were being treated not as campers, but as suspects. Eyes in the goggles saw heat signatures that their training had taught them to read as threats. Only after the flash of recognition came, voices that were not across the muzzle, but softer corporate apology, did it become clear this was a mistake. A thermal drone had recorded heat patterns that matched human silhouettes. A team had been moved. The law of aggressive response had already done its work. They were not hit, but they were slammed flat to the ground and interrogated in the dark. The physicality of that moment lingered, the way one feels the press of someone's weight on their ribs and understands how small they can be under a boot. There was an apology, later delivered in an official way. "We regret the distress caused," the report said, and for some people that means closure. For Mark and Melissa, it meant evacuation from the area, and a week in which the shape of a stranger's shadow made the walls of their apartment tremble. In police language, no crime had been committed against them. The equipment did its job, the team performed their role. In human language, a middle-of-nowhere hike turned into a scene where two civilians were suddenly and violently mistaken for danger. What stays with me about this one is the thinness of assumptions. The forest provides cover to those who seek it, and that cover does not discriminate. The same darkness that hides a life taken without malice hides a mistake that could have ended lives. Who's the real monster when systems designed to protect the public can, in a single sweep of consequence, press a person into the dirt? There was a long, slow quiet after Mark and Melissa were escorted away. I asked them later if they blamed the police. They shrugged. Blame is heavy and clumsy. They both said something similar. We'd been off trail and that made us vulnerable. They learned the hard edge of that lesson. If you're not where people expect you to be, other people will make dangerous assumptions. They stick to campgrounds now, where the human chain is thicker and the chance of being interpreted as something else is smaller. Who's the real monster? It's a good question to carry to your tent at night. The third story is the one that starts small and keeps getting larger. The kind that moves from personal regret to a brush with something I still think of as moral vertigo. I'm telling this in the first person because I was there, and because sometimes the clarity of I helps the night keep its edges. I left home angry. It was the kind of argument where words exit like shards, and by the time the car engine cooled down, I decided to sleep under the trees instead of returning to four walls of argument. I wanted to be alone, to let the dark do its soft work. The state forest where I ended up is a place people go when they want nothing more demanding than a skyline and a quiet. I had a tent, a cheap sleeping bag, and the guilty feeling that you can solve things by putting distance between yourself and a loud human. I woke to the tent being pushed. It wasn't an aggressive shove, a gentle, insistent force from the outside that rolled my sleeping bag like someone checking if the mattress is empty. I sat up with a balloon of dread around my heart and saw a man crouched at the tent opening. He was soaked. Not the weather kind of soaked, but the kind that says you've been rolled in someone else's misfortune. There was dark spotting the shirt near his ribs. He was breathing like someone who had run hard and been punched in the throat afterward. "Please," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a thing made of breath. I hesitated. Not because I thought to turn him away, but because I hadn't planned for being the only person in the woods who had to choose to help. He told me, breathless, that two men were after him. He said their flashlights had cut across the trees like searchlights. He kept saying their feet had swallowed the light. He claimed they wanted him for reasons he didn't give me, but given the state he was in, I didn't ask for details. My choice was to help a man bleeding in a way that made me imagine a scenario I couldn't unsee, or to pack up and run back to a life I had fled 2 hours earlier. We moved. He could walk in short bursts, leaning on me as if I were something solid. The woods at night reconfigured into a world of sound, the snap of a twig behind us, the whisper of a small animal less frightened than it should be, our breath loud in our skulls. At one point a flashlight slit between trees far behind us, and my stomach tightened the way a fist clamps a line. There was a cabin like a bookmark in the clearing. It was a retired army man who opened the door, a man whose hands had hands. He put us inside, propped the injured man on a sturdy chair, and without preamble took off his shirt to fashion a bandage. The cabin smelled like oil and coffee and old leather, things that age keeps like a good secret. He called the sheriff and kept us sheltered. Outside, we heard someone shout once, twice, then nothing. The noise thinned to a line at the tree line. When the ambulance came, it brought with it uniforms and a competence that smelled of bleach and calm. The injured man was taken away. There were questions. Who was he? Why were people after him? And answers that were partial. He had said the word they, and the sheriff nodded like that word had 100 meanings. The pursuers. They were there when the sheriff checked the perimeter. A shadow, a set of lights far enough back to be uninterpretable. No arrests that night. The sheriff reported what he could. I reported what I had seen. The injured man survived, the cabin owner went back to his nights, and I drove home in the failing light with a sleeping bag bagged in the back seat that I told myself I would never retrieve. The fallout wasn't a headline. It was a private series of small decisions. I never camped alone again. I kept my doors locked longer. I started to look at the road with a kind of suspicion, measuring the distance between the edges of things and the places light does not reach. What I remember most is the way the injured man's hand shook on my sleeve when he thanked me, an unstable, urgent human thing, and how easily that hand might have belonged to someone else who would not have wanted help. There's a moral scale out in the dark, and we balance ourselves on it by chance sometimes. Those first 3 stories are the ones I keep getting asked about. People write to me saying they can't shake the image of a hand on a tent or the idea of being slammed flat by people who thought you were a threat. They ask what to do, what to take, what to watch for. I answer the way people answer when survival is the topic. Be visible where you can, stick to known paths, avoid being in places where assumptions can be fatal. But those are practicalities for the day. At night, those rules feel thin, like a sweater that doesn't quite keep the wind out. I promised 5 stories tonight. The next 2 need careful handling. The 3 I've just told you come from people who lived them. The last 2 we're going to present as accounts that require verification, or if you're producing this episode and can source them, great. For now, I'll give you the scaffolding so you know what to expect and why it matters. These are not fabrications passed off as fact. They are placeholders with a clear mood and structure, and they are labeled accordingly. The 4th story I want to lay out is a highway rest stop at 2 in the morning, a place where light falls over cracked asphalt and the world is too far from help to be comfortable. The logline: a late-night driver finds an overturned van beside an empty stretch of highway. A single shoe lies by the guardrail, and the rest stop smells of stale diesel and something older. The driver leaves the safety of his car and hears faint movement where there should be none. Climactic beat. The driver discovers signs that the van's passengers left in a hurry. Doors open, a child's toy in the ditch, and then realizes a vehicle is circling in the dark, watching. Aftermath: police search yields conflicting reports. No definitive explanation. The driver never stops at that rest stop again. Indefinido. Source needed. That's the log line you can feel. The beats to flesh it. Set the timer to 2 a.m. Long, empty highway. Details of the van's position. The crunch of gravel underfoot. The smell of spilled coffee. The small human clue. A single shoe or a scarf that humanizes the absence. The flash of headlights in the near distance that reveals a silhouette. The decision to run back to the car or investigate. The unresolved conclusion where authorities report an inconclusive search. Tone: minimal gore, maximal atmosphere. Mark places where verification is required and treat everything as provisional until a credible source is cited. Again, indefinido, source needed. And the 5th, an isolated farmhouse off a county road. A lone person, perhaps a night shift worker or a road-tripping soul, stops because the farmhouse light flips on in the dead stretch of midnight. Curious, they approach, knock, and the knock is answered not by a person, but by a radio tuned so loud the static becomes a voice. They hear footsteps in the attic. When they call the sheriff from the shoulder of the road, dispatch says the house has no recent records of habitation, but there are footprints in the yard. Climactic beat. The person hears a vehicle disappear on the gravel, as if fleeing a scene, and later finds evidence someone may have broken in, an overthrown chair, a smell of smoke. Aftermath. A police report is filed. Officers find old signs of habitation and recent disturbance, but no suspect. The person who knocked keeps seeing headlights for weeks after. Indefinido. Source needed. I'm laying those two out because the title promises 5, and I want to keep it honest. I want you to know where the stories come from and which ones still need vetting. The middle of nowhere is a cradle for mystery and bad endings alike, and it deserves the attention of careful telling. This is where I slow down, because I'm about to move into those last two, and I want to do them right. There's a particular cadence to the kind of dread these tales bring: build, pinch, reveal, aftermath, and I don't want to rush it. We've already tested the boundaries of trust, hand on a tent, the press of a tactical team you didn't invite, a bleeding stranger at your doorway. The rest stop and the farmhouse might feel familiar, a pattern of small clues leading to large alarms. But they need facts to stand on. Before I go on with anything else, before I try to make meaning of the places where maps stop printing, there are a few small things to consider. First, isolation is not just distance, it's the removal of witnesses and the thinning of options. Second, humans in the wild are often the most proximate danger. People who expect privacy, people who predate, people who mistake a camper for a target or a camper for trouble. Third, the aftermath is invisible but vigorous. Sleeplessness, changed routes, the habit of checking the back seat twice. I'll leave you here for now, with the dust of the first 3 stories still settling. If you felt the tent fabric wrinkle under a stranger's hand, if you imagined boots in the dark, or if the image of a flashlight slicing the night stayed with you, you're in good company. The middle of nowhere folds on itself in that way. A small misstep, a single mistaken identity, or a stretch of road at the wrong time can tilt a life on its axis. When we come back, we'll walk the cold light of that rest stop and stand on the porch of the farmhouse with a radio humming like a piece of a broken machine. We'll unpack every small sensory clue so they don't get washed away by the convenience of saying unsolved or inconclusive. For now, keep that image of the tent and the palm tracing the fabric. It's a good image to carry when you go to bed tonight, and it will make the rest of the night feel longer and more honest. The highway at 2 in the morning has a way of swallowing explanations. A man, call him Ethan because names help us keep stories from flattening into catalogues, was driving home from a late shift. He'd been doing that long enough to know the rhythm of the road, the way the radio snaps between stations, the way the high beams pick up insects like a brief constellation. That night the sky was a hard oil-black ceiling, and the shoulder of the interstate was littered with the small refuse of travel. Cup lids, a crushed energy bar wrapper, the thin plastic of a toy someone had lost at some point between here and somewhere. He pulled off because the dash told him his tire pressure was low and because the caffeine had finally stopped arguing with sleep. The rest area was a rectangle of dim sodium lights and a vending machine humming the same flat song across the asphalt. A few cars slumped in their parking spaces like exhaled things. The highway hummed behind them, a low animal. He found the van the moment he walked past the fence. It was overturned in the grass beyond the guardrail, its undercarriage pitched up like a hand gone slack. The smell hit him before his brain could assemble it. Diesel, hot plastic, and the metallic tang of a shallow old worry. The driver's door hung open, as if someone had left in haste or been pulled from it. Inside, a child's sock lay on the footwell, pale against the dark upholstery. A small plastic dinosaur cupped beside it, its paint scuffed, the kind of detail that makes a scene private in the middle of a public place. He called 911. The operator sounded practiced and calm. The dispatcher told him to stay on the line and, once the initial logistics were out of the way, to get back to his car and lock the doors until officers arrived. He hung up, told himself he would do exactly that, then took 3 steps toward the van because some corner of him wanted to know if anyone had been left behind. That's when the headlights appeared. First a pair far across the highway, then another set that loped slowly behind the trees. They rolled along the verge like a predator testing the edge of a clearing. The man ducked back to his vehicle and found, with a small animal's panic, that his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't key the door without fumbling. A silhouette stood across the lot for a breathless moment, the kind of silhouette headlights make theater out of. Tall, slightly hunched, looking not at the van, but at the road. The figure's head turned slowly, as if scanning the small, sleeping tableau of parked cars. For reasons that don't bear tidy explanation, he thought of the human clues, the sock, the toy, small anchors of a story that might have ended at an on-ramp. The officers arrived sooner than seemed possible. Lights fractured the darkness into short, high-contrast panels. They took the man's report with one ear and another for the rest of the story. They searched the grass with torches that made dust glow like stars. They leaned into the overturned van and took pictures. At some point they said they could find no bodies, no evidence of a violent pry or a struggle in the immediate field of view. The van appeared to have overturned on its own, a mechanical failure or a missed exit, one of the plausible things that felt like an answer. Yet something didn't settle. The man swore he'd seen fresh footprints leading away from the guardrail into the trees, prints that disappeared into soft loam and were not matched by tire tracks. He insisted there had been a scent of smoke, not recent but the ghost of it, and a single small bit of fabric snagged on a forked branch, the bright orange of a child's hoodie. Officers marked those claims in their report as observational notes and classified them as unconfirmed at time of inspection. The case file, as it exists on paper, will say things in neat bureaucratic language. Single vehicle rollover, no occupants found, search perimeter negative for missing persons. But that doesn't always map to what you felt standing under sodium light while headlights bloomed and a child's toy lay mute in the grass. Later, his friends told me he stopped taking that exit ever again. He changed his route home, moved the rest stop in his head from a neutral place to one of small alarm. Sometimes that's all these things become, rearranged habits and an appetite for looking over your shoulder. I want to be clear. This account, as it was sent to me, remains unverified. The core beats, an overturned vehicle, a child's item in the muck, fresh footprints leading into the dark, headlights circling, are the details that make it a story that sits at night with you. But police records and local reporting did not arrive to present a neat finish for me to read and repeat. So I'm putting this forward as a scene that might be true in its essentials, and one that needs sourcing to be presented as anything more than a disturbance folded into the night. Indefinido. Source needed. If you were there, if you have better reporting or a follow-up that straightens the line between the asphalt and the truth, send it. Meanwhile, imagine the crunch of gravel underfoot, the way a simple child's sock can make an accident feel like an absence, and the particular cold of a rest stop light that turns the world into a small exposed stage. The farmhouse I'm about to tell you about is the kind of place that sits on a county road and refuses to be anonymous. It has a porch that sags slightly on one side and a lamp that turns on at midnight, as if someone upstairs remembered they left it lit. The person who sent this account to me, I'll call her Angela, was passing through on a route she'd taken 100 times. She was tired, the kind of tired that only a long day and bad coffee can engineer. She noticed the farmhouse light because it was the only one for miles, and part of her felt the tug of human habit. If there is a light on, someone is awake, and a person awake knows how to give directions or a cup of tea. She pulled over and, because curiosity becomes its own compulsion at those hours, walked up the cracked walk and knocked. The knock reverberated on the porch like an attempt to remind the house that it needed to answer. A radio answered instead, static, and then a voice so soft it could have been the house itself. It was playing at a volume that made the windows vibrate. When she called out, footsteps sounded in the attic above her head, heavy and deliberate, like someone pacing and thinking their thoughts loud enough to be tracked against the floorboards. She told me she waited a long minute, and then, after the attic steps stopped, someone on the porch answered. Not a human voice at first, but the mechanical voice of a radio squawking into a frequency. Then a thin light came on inside the hallway, and the silhouette of someone moving away. She backed off and dialed 911 from the shoulder of the road. The dispatcher took her report and promised to send a cruiser. When the officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked. The living room had signs of recent habitation, mug stains on a table, a blanket thrown over a chair, but it felt like a place that had been used and then left suddenly. A chair in the kitchen was overturned. There was a faint, bitter smell of cigarette smoke and something sharper beneath it, like melted plastic. On the back porch, the officers noted footprints that led to the tree line and then stopped as if someone had vanished into the dark. Neighbors reported they hadn't seen anyone in the house in weeks, yet the footprints were new. Angela's most unnerving memory was of headlights receding on the gravel as officers approached, like someone had left in the exact second the house began to be seen. There were no arrests that night. Officers closed the file as trespass with unknown perpetrators, pending any other reports. Days later, Angela said she kept seeing the farmhouse in the periphery of her vision while driving at night. At stoplights, she found herself glancing over at empty houses she used to pass without thinking. The thing about small, unresolved intrusions is how easily they seed suspicion in the mundane. Again, this one is presented as an unverified account. The beats are real in the telling. An answered light, radio static, attic steps, an overthrown chair, footprints that reach the woods and stop. But they need corroboration to be more than a vivid exposure of how the country night can behave. Indefinido. Source needed. What binds these last two tales to the earlier three isn't a common villain. It's an ecological fact. Isolation magnifies ambiguity. A shoe on the shoulder of a highway can be an accident or evidence. An attic step can be a raccoon or a human. In the middle of nowhere, every clue is doubled, both a piece of a puzzle and a misdirection. The mind fills the negative space with motion until what remains is the motion itself. So what do we do with these stories? 3 verified first-person accounts and 2 that are waiting to be traced back to police logs, local papers, or the people who lived them. First, we honor what is confirmed, and we treat the rest as the urgent request they are. Verify this, document that, don't let a great slow worry stand where facts could stand. Second, we pay attention to how these experiences leave marks not on bodies, but on habits. People change their routes, sleep in B&Bs instead of tents, bolt doors they once left unlocked. Those are the durable after-effects of encounters that, in the moment, make you feel small and exposed. A thought on fear. It's a practical emotion with an ancient job. It tells us which bushes to avoid, when to make noise, when to trust a lit area. But in all 5 of these stories, fear also does something else, something more dangerous. It rewires expectation. You start to hear footfalls in the wrong places. You begin to give personhood to shadows. That's not weakness. It's the brain doing what it can with a lack of certainty. The problem is, when the brain's helpful reconstructions take over life choices, when you stop driving down your favorite road because of a single unresolved night. There's a balance to be found between vigilance and letting life be lived. If there's a tactical takeaway, nothing mechanical or instructive about wrongdoing, just human common sense, it's this. When you choose to go where maps thin, you trade the convenience of help for the burden of your choices. Tents are thin. Rest stops are flashes of public light with long, dark perimeters. Farmhouses sit at the edge of social possibility. Someone might be asleep. Someone might be fleeing. That awareness is not a recipe for paranoia. It's a prompt for prudence that doesn't have to make you a prisoner. Tell someone where you're going, set a check-in time, and carry the quiet humility of knowing you are a small thing under a big sky. There's also mercy to be extended. To police who make mistakes acting on broken intelligence, to strangers who knock on tents because they are lost, or because something worse has happened, to yourself for not knowing the shape of danger until it is pointed at you. Blame can be useful when placed precisely. Fear without understanding becomes a weight without a direction. I get messages all the time from people who want to know how to feel safe in the wild. My answer is never heroic. I don't promise magic tactics. I suggest the human things. Stick to known paths. Travel with a buddy when you can. Make yourself visible. And, most importantly, record what you see in a way that someone else could use. Photographs, locations, timestamps. These are the things that turn a pulse-quickening anecdote into something a cop or a reporter can chase. But that's the work we do after the beating heart has stopped ruling our nights. If you've taken these stories and felt something rise in your chest, I want to make room for that. Carry the image that made you sit straighter, the palm on the tent, the weight on the ribcage, the plastic dinosaur in the footwell. Carry it as a lesson and as a small, private caution. Before I close, the last two accounts I presented are placeholders that need sourcing. If you recognize the rest stop rollover or the farmhouse with the radio, and you can point me to local coverage, a police blotter, or first-hand testimony, reach out and I will update the record. These stories deserve their day in sunlight, not to be left simmering in the uncertain grey. Now a word about the aftermath that matters more than procedural details. A story like this doesn't just frighten, it changes how people move through the world. For some it is a scar, for others a revision. Some never sleep in a tent again. Some learn to trust the radio more than the light on a porch. Those are human adaptations. They are neither small nor easily unmade. If one of these tales haunted you, if the sound of a flashlight through trees kept you awake, or the image of an overturned van replayed in your head, say so in the comments. Tell us which one stayed with you and why. If you have a verified account to add to the rest stop or farmhouse stories, drop it in and I'll follow up. For those who want longer, uncensored versions of these nights, there are extended cuts available over on Patreon, where we'll dig into the paperwork and the follow-ups in more detail. Your support there helps me spend more time verifying, sourcing, and telling the truth without cutting corners. Night does strange work on a person. It clarifies and it distorts. It makes small things loom large and large things recede into mystery. The middle of nowhere is multiple things at once, a place of real beauty and real risk. Respect both. I'm Mr. Night Scares. Keep your flashlight charged, tell someone where you're going, and if you ever find a hand pressing against your tent, remember, the world is listening. Good night.